Europe and from so many different organizations and backgrounds. It strengthens us in the belief that linear risks really is a relevant and very important topic. My name is Fieke de Haan. I'm lead of the Circle Finance program, and I will be your moderator today. In a minute, we will start with my colleague Shyam, who will give a brief introduction of the linear risks essay. Then we'll continue with the 5-minute perspective sharing of all the authors on the linear risk essay. And you can see everybody on screen except for Arnold Walrecht from KPMG, as he will dial in and is not able to be in front of a video. Afterwards, we'll move to the interactive part. We do invite you to raise questions by using the Q&A button you can find on your screen below. If you want to address questions to a specific author, please state it in the question so we can address it properly. Finally, we'll have the last 10 minutes. We'll use it as a wrap-up, defining our next steps in our challenging route in the linear risks. Thank you very much. And Shyam, please take over.
Great. Thank you, Fieke. So I'll start off with telling a bit about how we got to this linear risk essay and how we started this journey of creating this document, this thought piece, in order to start the conversation around linear risks. And our organization, Circular Economy, talks about the different aspects of the circular economy, and we use, for example, the 7 key elements of the circular economy to explain how cities and businesses and various SMEs, startups, etc., can take steps towards the circular economy. And one of the things that we were curious about is what about the sort of risks of the linear economy, and how can we start a conversation around discussing what are the aspects of linear businesses and what are the risks of continuing to follow linear business practices. And so what we started thinking about is how to kind of reframe the 7 key elements into the linear equivalent, the sort of anti-circular elements. And so we developed with PGGM, KPMG, EBRD, and WBCSD this linear risk paper, where we explore, for example, what are the risks of these various linear business practices, utilizing non-renewable resources, for example, or prioritizing the sales of new products, failing to collaborate, or failing to adapt or innovate. And in the linear risk paper, we kind of explored various risk factors for these different linear business practices and tried to identify some examples of case studies where these linear business practices are prevalent and the kind of risks that they have and how it permeates not only within the context of the businesses, but across the wider economy, how it impacts, for example, not only the business side, but also the investor side and the macroeconomic side. And the key aspect of our paper is a sort of linear risk matrix. It provides a framework of the different market and operational and business and legal risks that are present in these linear business practices. So you can see through the matrix how there's risks related to scarcity of primary resources, for example, particularly with the world's cobalt supply scarcity, or, for example, the risks of failing to collaborate with disruptive new technologies or supply chain inefficiencies that come as a result of lack of information sharing, or how there's various businesses who have failed to adapt or innovate and the kinds of risks that they're facing due to the inability to, for example, hire new talent or facing more stringent environmental laws. And so we see this essay really as a conversation starter to start discussing with the business and financial community about the idea of linear risks. And we'd love to explore this further and build upon this thought piece to see how we can formalize this concept of linear risk and really engage the business and investor community to work with us and see how we could make this a key aspect of how we think about the linear economy and the circular economy. I'll hand it over to back to you, Fika.
Okay, thank you, Shaan, for this introduction. Then we move on to Brandon. Brandon, can you please share your perspective on the essay?
Yes. Hello. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Well, thank you for having me and organizing, Shaan and Melanie. We as WBCSD have been trying to get this conversation as well on the radar of our companies for a bit over a year now. The circular economy concept continues to gain traction. It's very popular across our membership. They're particularly interested in the opportunity lens around circular economy. So a report we did released last year, analysis, we found that of all the companies that are active in circular economy that they would claim, that 80% of them were driven primarily by the opportunity behind circular practices. And only 20% were driven by the risk that their company or their business was facing if they did not move towards the circular economy. And as Shaan mentioned, this could be the jump in cobalt prices, this could be France's product lifetime labeling, or what we're seeing right now as the societal and media pushback against the plastic industry. But what we see with linear risk is that this isn't just a risk department issue. This touches on everyone across the company, all departments. So regardless of whether you're in design or marketing, global affairs, procurement, production, these are issues that you will have to address at some point. These companies, the way to do this, we do quite a bit of work on integrating environmental and sustainability risk into a company's regular enterprise risk management system. And that's done out of our Redefining Value program. However, they've done quite a bit of work in understanding the challenges in integrating sustainability risk as a whole, but a lot of those lessons can apply to this case. And the key to integrating those risks into an organization's ongoing ERM process, we could also take the lessons from TCFD, or the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and the conversations that that movement is forcing within the private sector. But there's different actions that companies can take. Once you're able to identify some of these linear risks as we lay out, is assessing the continuity risk to your business, and not just understanding what is the risk versus the probability, but what is the vulnerability that your company faces against some of these risks. You should also consider embedding some of these risks into your business strategy. That kind of goes for risk as a large, but thinking about some of these linear risks across the categories in the matrix that Shaan just posted provides a good structure for how to approach this issue internally. But I think what it ultimately comes down to is putting these linear risks on the radar at the board level and highlighting the threat to business continuity and vulnerability that your ongoing business has subject to them. So we were very happy to be invited to participate in this conversation with the colleagues on the line here. It's one that we're confident will continue to come up increasingly so over time, and hope to spur the conversation a little bit further with this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Then I would like to continue with Frido. Frido, can you please share your perspective?
Yes, happy to. Well, hi everybody. Let me start with saying hi to everybody here. And I think a very important debate we have, or dialogue, on linear risk. And one of the things maybe which is hopeful is that we are at least 15 years earlier in this discussion than we are with climate. So we talk about climate risks a lot, but we were, as a financial sector, we are pretty late in discussing this. So we're, I think, relatively early now. And why it's interesting, I'm from PGGM, which is an institutional investor, a long-term investor as well. is if when you put it very simple, we try to look for opportunities and avoid the risks. And it's not only the risks really of today, but also the risks of tomorrow. And the risks we have are really financial risk, but they represent the business risk Brendan mentioned earlier. So when there's risk in business, there's risk in their financiers, of course. And we also talk then about new risks. So what kind of risk do we see in the near future, or maybe in the midterm future? And this, when you look to all the analysis of what remaining linear will do to our economies, that imposes a lot of true risks. And the true risks, not only for the business and then their employees, but it's also for societies and the financiers of these businesses. So that's the reason why we got involved and try to understand, because they're very complex risks, to say. The table looks complex already, Sham showed you, but behind the table is really a very complex world of different kind of risk, and it could be reputational risk, but it could be true scarcity business risk. What will happen when prices go up? When will happen when there's no alternative for certain materials? And then there is the business could be really in trouble. So to understand that was really the reason. Understand this concept of linear risk, and when you see drivers for change, you see sometimes. Like Brendan said, a lot of people are really looking for living, maybe the ideology of going circular and hoping for a more efficient economy, which is really the claim. But in a linear mindset world, we still have really cashing these more efficient economy promises. Circular economy is very difficult. And maybe the driver for change is the linear risk knowledge as well. So we really don't know how much linear risk we have in our portfolios. I think we should know, and it's not that we maybe tomorrow or the next week or maybe next year will be affected by those risks, but I'm sure when we do forecasts, we will be in the midterm or in the long term. And I think the lesson we can learn from previous risks is that you cannot be too early trying to analyze those risks, especially when you're in a long-term investment like we are. And one of the, I think, the aspects to conclude that Brendan mentioned earlier is that this going from linear to circular really affects the whole business. So not only one department. It affects the strategy, it affects all departments. And if that's the case, really, this transition within companies is even much more hard to do. So also businesses, and maybe we can engage through our positions within organizations, engage to make them aware that thinking about circularity is a very wise thing to do. And looking forward to all the questions and all the other contributions now. So thanks.
Then moving on to the next perspective. Anna, can you please share yours? Oops.
Yeah, now I'm with it. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Very happy to be part of this very interesting panel with colleagues from Circle Economy, WBCSD, KPMG and PGGM. EBRD is very eager to participate in the discussion around linear risks, and we took part in this, in the composition of this essay, understanding that the discussion is important not only for defining the concept of circular economy going forward, but also to specifically for the EBRD countries of operation. We cover more than 35 countries across 3 continents, and the transition from linear to circular economy is certainly very present in almost all countries of operation. Our main activity is project finance, which of course is very tightly linked to the type of business models that our clients have. And our business approach to work with the clients is looking at integrating the financing with technical assistance and policy dialogue. The latter two tools look into ensuring that the financing we'll provide is complemented with additional tools for the companies to overcome market or capacity barriers, and that the solutions that are achieved through our loan or equity financing will have a stable and a long-term perspective for their implementation. Our mandate is to foster transition to well-functioning market economies, and our definition includes the aspect of green. So we believe that by preserving and improving the environment, this is a key factor for achieving a well-functioning, sustainable market economy. Thus, we also seek to increase the volume and share of our green financing in the total business volume that we have. We have set ourselves a target to achieve 40% of business volume by 2020. We are on good track, I should say, and the challenge is to maintain that speed and even to scale up. So green being part of our core mandate, of course we need to understand better what linear risks mean for our clients in our countries of operation, and thus this discussion, this topic aligns very good with our green agenda. Just to know that oftentimes our clients and in our countries of operation are facing these risks day to day, and they are exposed to price volatility, to uncertainties in their supply chains. So by addressing the linear risks, EBRD is supporting the clients to address their operational challenges. Happy to participate further, to get into discussion and questions, provide examples of our investments, but I think that's now for the first input. It's enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And then last but not least, we have Arnoud on the phone. Arnoud, can you hear us?
Yes, very well.
Yes, great. Can you please share your perspective?
Yes, happy to do so. Well, first of all, also from my side, great to be in this webinar, sharing not only, let's say, a couple of perspectives that I will touch upon, but also to support the messages that the previous speakers already have brought in the open. From KPMG, we, well, maybe like Brendan mentioned, we would like to focus on risks, but the more human aspect of where's the opportunity and how to move on with added value from a company perspective, that's something you should bring in balance. Our perspective that I would like to add to the discussion is the price mechanisms that we now use, and also the financial decision making that is, well, as we are quite used to traditional risk models, traditional financing and pricing schemes. There is a growing movement of, well, I would say, front-running companies that are trying to internalize the risk factors that we just discussed in a specific business model or investment decision that are actually quite traditional, focusing on cash, balance sheet basics. And we would like to bring a new perspective here, where you also look at the more external effects of a business. Just to give you an example, if you look at the current pricing of building and construction materials, these are market prices that do not cover all the externalities that occur and the cost to society that is associated to those individual building materials and building a building as a total final product. So the growing trend of companies that is internalizing these externalities, which means that risks such as economic, social, and environmental impact are added to traditional financial decision making. And on the model that you can see, there are multiple factors that can drive this kind of internalization, from market dynamics to external policy pressures. On the policy part, I think there is a big role for not only front-running companies that move this debate on themselves, but also discussing this in a more, let's say, policy and tax context, for example, to accelerate a totally different view how a business case, an individual business case decision would look like if you also take into account the price effect of the risks that Shyam already shared with us. So, of course, the flip side of taking this approach is also to see where is positive impact and positive external impact created, which is very interesting from an investor perspective if you want to pick out those companies that are managing linear risks quite well, maybe even are able to show that in financial terms, and at the same time have a very sound long-term business model dealing with the opportunities. So to finish here, Fieke, I think that is something we would like to bring to the debate to accelerate the movement to more sound circular business cases.
Okay, thank you for your input. We got some questions from the people listening. And I would invite all the people that are listening and do want to raise questions. Now is the moment, so please state them using the Q&A button that you can see below in your screen, and address it to somebody specific if you'd like to, and if not, we'll address it to the SA team and see who's willing to answer and brave enough. No, of course, everybody would like to, I think. Following on the last comment that you made, Arnoud, and also following on the comment that Shyam said, it's a starter, it's a conversation starter, it's a first step. Where can you, maybe I would address this to Arnoud, where would you like to see this conversation moving in what can be a nice next step?
Well, I think there is a clear link to two, let's say, business focus areas. First of all, the community within companies that is dealing with, just to make it tangible, is dealing with what kind of risks are we exposed to and how do we disclose on managing those risks from a resource perspective, from a raw material perspective that, in many cases have a finite business context. That's something I would like to see a take up. So more sound metrics, also better measurement of the right type of information that is to be shared. It is hard, and that's something where Brandon also can touch upon with the program that he is running. It's really hard for companies to get a grip on the type of management information they need for bringing opportunities alive. But on the risk side, we are facing the same problem. So that's the first area. I think the second area is really about investors that, as Frido rightly said, figuring in the financial implications of climate change quite strongly already, also in their decision making and policies on who to invest in and how to invest in, but also in engagement, of course. This is something where I would like to see new energy.
Thank you. Brandon, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just touch on one initiative that we have ongoing right now, part of our Factor 10 program, which is WBCSD's Circular Economy Initiative, is a work stream on circular metrics. And actually, KPMG is helping us out with this work, where we're trying to help companies establish a consensus-based way to measure their circularity at the company level. There are quite a few ways to do so. I would say increasingly, companies are coming up with their own ways to measure circularity. They're measuring their products, they're measuring business units, but it fails to mean anything outside that company's four walls. And so what we're trying to do is establish a common language, not only allows a company to understand how it can improve over time and the opportunities that are there for it internally, but also enable investors, for example, to be able to start understanding, you know, how do industries compare to industries, how do companies within an industry compare to others. So it's something that is a very big challenge. It's not easy. We're not entirely sure what the end product will look like, but we are working through the summer and up until October to try and develop a draft framework to do this. And that, you know, ultimately gets to the idea of mobilizing investments in circular activities.
Thank you. Shyam, do you have anything to add to this wise words?
Yeah, indeed, and as you rightly said, it is indeed a conversation starter, and one of the kind of components of the essay towards the end, one of the concluding steps that we outlined is indeed how can we build upon the essay in order to deepen the understanding of linear risk and integrate it into the financial risk management language to sort of understand these short-term and long-term implications of linear risks and create forums with the financial community and the business community to integrate these risks into established risk management processes and also address some of the kind of disclosure challenges of linear risk and potentially use the climate change risk disclosure as a model for it. And I think, as mentioned by Arnaud and Brendan, there's definitely concrete steps that can be taken both from the business community as well as the financial community in order to see how to further develop this idea of linear risks.
Okay, thank you. Anna, Frido, anything to add to that? Or?
Well, maybe before action, there's always awareness. And I think that we need to raise awareness, not only with financial institutes, but also with businesses. So just a simple question is, do you know what the longevity is of your materials? How longer can you get the virgin materials into from upstream into your system? I think that is very wise, and it's also good to understand from a financial perspective is that when you engage with the companies you invest in, that you also can ask these kind of questions, that you understand really what business they are in, what components they have. And of course, I understand it's a very complex, and you cannot go through every material within a product when you're an investor. But I think it really starts with awareness and this collective learning we are now doing. We really need to build further on the awareness from an economic perspective. So that.
Just to add something to Frido's point, we also as a financiers, we of course are very interested that our clients succeed in the long term, and we have a tool called the resource efficiency audit, where we work with clients and industry and sector experts to have something like a check whether the proposed project, the proposed investment is really looking into the resource efficiency aspect in a most cost optimal way. And oftentimes results of our resource efficiency audit support the client into taking a better investment decision, which at the end actually addresses some of those linear risks as identified in the paper. So having those technical assistance tools from investors, from the financiers, I think this is, and building up on the work on the linear risks essay, there's definitely room, so much more room for synergies in this regard.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we do have a question. One of the questions coming in from the audience is the question to the whole essay team. And it states, the B2C conversation around linear risks seems to be ongoing, although in the initial phase. However, the B2B conversation seems to be a bit more stagnant. There could be tremendous opportunity in the B2B. How can this be facilitated, and how does your essay shed light on this conversation in particular? Anybody who wants to shed their light. Guido.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting question. Well, what we here talk really is today is about linear risks. So the risks we see when we don't change, and this question is really how do we change? And I think it's a very important one. And what the European Commission is now doing together with the European Investment Bank is trying to see how can we get the circular economy markets really to work, because they're not really working yet today. And what they identified are 7 different kind of incentives that they are now traditionally linear focused and should be really circular focused to get circular economy markets going. What I think one of the different angles to view these 7 incentives is really all about mindset. So what's the mindset? And I when the question was asked, I was thinking of we had a big conference here of procurement officers, and the chair asked them, "Did you ever bought something secondhand for your company?" And they all, they almost vomited collectively, and they all say, "Of course not. We want something new." So and there's a kind of mindset to change if you say, well, maybe refurbished is as good, or maybe circular with components, already used components is from the same quality. And I really think that a B2B market is definitely differently, and they all have their own kind of characteristics. And I agree that for maybe procurement is a kind of showstopper within the B2B market. And again, when you look to the B2C market, there you see, I think very problematic is the reverse logistic challenge, you could say. So they all have their own kind of characteristics because it's a completely new you could say economic reality that we should work on, and I think these 7 incentives the European Commission can be somehow an umbrella or a structure to work structured on this transition to a more circular economy. But I wouldn't agree with the person who asked the question that I also see in a B2B market, I see change. We, for ourselves, are working on a Fairphone as a service project now, which is very interesting, but also very tough. And it's not because we're not willing, because there's a different linear reality that we need to face and to overcome, really.
Thank you, Frido. Anybody has anything to add to that? Okay, and then we'll move on to the next question. It's a question, have you done more granular research on the ROE of single circular model that companies want to implement? Shyam, maybe can you say something about that?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that our organization has done related to circular business models is we organize a sort of a community of practice where we brought in, for example, the financial perspective, the legal perspective, and the business perspective, and we really worked with Fairphone to look at phone as a service. So looking at how they can transition from the sales of Fairphones to more of a service model. And it really provided a sort of good understanding of what are all the requirements necessary from a financing perspective, a contract and agreements perspective, et cetera, in order to create these kinds of service models. And of course, these kinds of models definitely address some of the linear risks that are present in more traditional linear models, especially when it comes to better cycling of resources and ensuring that companies don't have to sort of rely on the sort of prioritization of sales, et cetera, and how they can become more future-proof in that regard. And I believe that essay is available on our website, and all the sort of templates that came out of how do you look at the financing of these models and how do you look at the setup of these contracts are available as well.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay, then we move on to the next question. It's for the whole essay team. It says a great number of companies do not pursue opportunities presented in CE practices due to assumptions about inherent risks in these. With the essay tackling the linear risks, does the essay team also illuminate the risks with transitioning CE practices, or what are your thoughts on this? Maybe that's a good one for Arnoud.
Well, following up on the previous discussion, I think this is in the same line of reasoning that you see that the uptake of circular business models is oftentimes not fitting traditional linear either regulation or risk models that are still used by, let's say, the majority of the financial community. So I think it's good that there are some movements that maybe central banks, be it risk communities of banks, sit together and discuss among themselves to take different approaches to how circular business models, and just to give an example. For example, if the collateral or the financial backing of a specific sales model is going more towards a different type of ownership model, where the contracts are more important than the underlying assets, to make reverse streams possible. That's something where we really would need to change our systems.
Okay, thank you. Any additions to that?
Frida, did you want to chime in?
I always want to respond on every question. But no, we leave it to that, because I saw a lot of very important questions being raised.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's a next question raised for EBRD and PGGM. And it states, how do you see the development of existing ESG risk management frameworks and sustainability performance requirements / standards in terms of considering linear risks? Brandon, can I give the floor to you?
Did you want Anna to answer?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Anna, sorry, a little confused. Anna, can you tell your perspective on this?
Certainly. Well, there is obviously a discussion, ongoing discussion, and ESG risks and sustainability performance standards have continuously been improved in time. I mean, several people already mentioned the example of considering climate, now also very inherent in ESG and sustainability practices. So definitely this type of discussion about definition of linear risks is flowing into considerations for improving ESG risk frameworks, sustainability for performance indicators, and so on. But in addition to that, let's not forget that in parallel to the ESG risks, we also talk about business operations and business performance risks. So I think those two discussions should go hand in hand in parallel. And once a company identifies a linear risks as a key to overcome in order to improve their business performance, this will translate into improving its ESG standards, and I think this is going on, and vice versa. So yes, it is a crucial discussion, and that's why again EBRD joined with big interest the concept definition through this essay work.
Thank you. And then Frido?
Thanks. Well, I start with a kind of critical remark, and I'm Dutch, so I can be critical, and that's really on the question somehow suggests that it's mainly an ESG kind of approach, and I think one of the big beliefs that we need to fight is that it's not a green agenda, circular economy, but it's really it's an agenda for people and profit more than it's for the planet. And this economic agenda, and that's also where we talk about linear risk, is really because we need a reset of our current economies. Again, but to end not so critical is that one of the important, I think, links when you talk about impact investing, or when you talk about be accountable for how the way you invest, is that there is a very clear link between circular economy on one hand as a means, and to all different kind of SDG performance. Really, if you see how circular economy contributes to energy use, or to water scarcity, or even to geopolitical tensions, then there are really a lot of positive impacts of going circular. And the metrics we need to prove that, or to show that, really, these are crucial. And I think that's one of the big next steps for the circular community, to show that they not only have a more efficient economy, that they only prevent some materials of being scarce, but in the end, really contributing to all very important societal challenges as climate change, as water stress, etc.
Thank you. Anyone would like to make an addition to that?
Well, maybe, yeah, this is Arnoud speaking. Maybe a small addition, and I like the more integrated approach that Frido just mentioned. And standards and benchmarks, they tend to chop up our, let's say, long-term investment struggles in pieces and buckets, and that's how the human brain also works. So we talk about climate change, we talk about circular economy, but in many occasions these come together, and I think the valuation part here, and also the pricing in part. So, for example, comparing different impacts in your portfolio, or from a business perspective, how that works out in financial terms, that might be an integrator.
Yeah. Thank you. Then we quickly move on to the next question. And it's about intangibles. It says, hi, I wanted to understand how you take into account the intangibles while creating the linear risk model. And if you do take them in account, how do you put any coefficient factor to calculate the cost for such intangibles? A hard one.
I can tell you a little bit on how this is done. This is Arnoud speaking again. I think it addresses the externalities point of view. There are more and more, let's say, agreed upon prices. So you could call them shadow prices, because they are not real economic prices, but shadow prices that you can use to calculate a specific impact of, for example, a resource based on fossil fuels. If you then compare it to a resource that is used, that is either renewable, or is to a much higher extent based out of recycled content, you can compare the difference in the intangibles, and the end result is a quantified price tag on how a specific circular product or a business avoids societal impact.
Okay. Any additions to that? Yeah, Frido?
Well, I think as important the question is, and till now in this essay we don't. We don't involve intangibles, and it's not only because it's very hard to do, to calculate or to put a price on something which is intangible, but it's maybe also is when you have an essay, you need to start from what we have and what we know, and then we build further. And I think it's very important, like Arnoud says, is that we have some metrics or some information on these intangibles where also circularity can improve conditions, really. But now we don't, really.
Okay, thank you. Then we move on to the new question. It's a question from Impact Hub Switzerland, and it states, is there a diagnostic per se to start the scoping and opportunity assessment with the business community that serves as a call to action, like the frame WBCSD is developing?
I guess I'm trying to understand the question. There is a framework to enable businesses to understand what they can do. I'm sorry, just trying to make sense of that.
Yeah, I think it's it's probably discussing the way to assess the circular economy opportunity, perhaps in the business community, perhaps related to the metrics that you guys are developing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. What we've worked on as WBCSD probably over the last 18 months is, really from the ground up, trying to help companies understand what the circular economy is, what it means to business, the various business cases that companies have made in the past. And so, we've done a collection of publications and resources that are available there, from a CEO guide that lays out the 5 business models from Accenture in a very short, crisp, clear document aimed for executives, anything to the 8 business cases for circular economy, really trying to break it down to almost a menu of items for people to take and work from. And probably the most comprehensive one that we've done is on the practitioner guide to circular economy. So what are the steps that you can take within your company based on what you do for that company? So whether you design, buy, make, sell, or finance, that there's specific things that you should be thinking about doing to start moving your company towards a more circular model. So I hope that answers your question. There's many different frameworks and structures we try to provide, and obviously try to tailor that to the intended audiences as much as possible. Yeah, again, I hope that answers your question.
I just wanted to add too that that basically one of the things that we at Circular Economy have developed is a circle assessment, and we developed it together with PGGM to understand what is the kind of circularity of various companies and organizations, and how does that relate to, for example, portfolios of investments, et cetera. And one of the things that we discovered, obviously, is what is important for financial institutions as well is not only know the kind of circularity of organizations, or the circular potential or the opportunity, but also the risk element. And this linear risk conversation is really great, because I think there's 2 sides to the coin of circularity. On the one hand, it provides a lot of business opportunity. On the other hand, it also mitigates a lot of linear risks. And obviously, different businesses and different investors will be activated by those 2 different perspectives. So I think it's important to also see how we can integrate, along with the identification of opportunities within the circular economy, to also see what kind of risks does it help mitigate, and what kind of linear risks does it address, and to offer those 2 different perspectives to get that holistic picture of what is the true potential of circularity.
Thank you. Anything, Guido?
Yeah, well, I think the opportunities I would like to underline are mainly theoretically still. So there are a lot of theoretic advantages of opportunities of going circular, but in real life, really, they're not present. And one of the reasons is that we have really a linear market, a linear dominated market. And first, before we come to opportunities, because I think that's mainly a kind of a business monopoly, that they should look for the business opportunities. But then again, if there are theoretical opportunities, we really cannot harvest them now, because there's really a linear dominated market, and we need to work on that first. So when we come to opportunities, first we need, for instance, a level playing field, that circular and linear are treated equally. And we definitely also need externalities pricing in, because then the circular model will outperform really the linear model. And this sadly is still the other way around now.
Yeah, maybe a short addition from Arnoud here. The business opportunities that are grasped by companies right now, to my opinion, mostly are short-term business opportunities. For example, gaining an extra revenue out of a waste stream, or upcycling of a specific material that gives you a little bit of a higher margin on the short term. On the longer term, that you might want to take other type of decisions that go a little bit deeper around the business model, the type of business, but also the supply chain and the value chain that the company is managing. And it's a more fundamental change.
Okay, thank you. Then there's a question came in also for the whole essay team, and it's talking about one of the linear risks that's mentioned in the essay. It says, very interesting that failing to innovate is mentioned as a linear risk. How is failing to innovate formulated, and does failing to innovate in terms of circularity pose an immediate risk? What do you think the opinion of managers that reap benefits of linear innovations is in regard to this? So it's lots of questions in one. Who would like to kick off in shining his or her light on the linear risk failing to innovate?
Maybe I can take that one as a start and have the others chime in. So indeed, what we looked at with this particular linear risk is the perspective of companies who kind of remain in the status quo, and really companies that do not see the kind of trends that are shaping up, and don't try to kind of collaborate more, work together with other businesses, incorporate new kinds of technologies, pursue new kinds of markets, etc. And so those are the kinds of risks that we incorporated in the essay, and the kind of dangers that we see. And of course, it's a very interesting question that you do ask in terms of the benefits of linear innovation, and how does that factor into this framework of linear risk? Because certainly there are lots of improvements that can be made that don't really provide circular outcomes, but more exacerbate the linear economy. And I think those are not the kinds of innovations that we had in mind when we formulated that particular linear business practice. And I think we are more looking at the fact that there are companies out there, as was mentioned before, there's this kind of subsidization, or this kind of propping up of the linear economy and linear markets that prevents some of the more circular business models and circular innovations from really coming to light. And how do you kind of spark that more? So how do you encourage more circular economy innovation, and encourage people to transition their business models away from sales of products towards services, to try to analyze the kind of resources they use and become smarter at how they make business decisions, etc.
Thank you. Any additional remarks to that?
No, but maybe the systems innovation part is failing in the discussion there, because for many, circular type of innovations, it's more of a systems innovation than a step change, doing a little less bad approach that we used to have around sustainability until now.
Okay. Well, thank you. There's many more questions that came in, but unfortunately, due to the timing, we're not able to answer all of them. However, we will try to answer them in writing, so there will be some answers provided to you. Next, I would like to start the wrap-up, and I would like to ask Shyam to kick off with what we see as next steps and where we invite you for collaboration.
Thanks, Fika. Yeah, indeed, we're very excited, as sort of closing mark, we're very excited to get this conversation started about the topic of linear risks, and we're really excited at the prospect of working together with PGGM and KPMG, EBRD, and WBCSD on this topic, and we'd love to involve others in the business and financial community to participate in this discussion and really help shape this concept of linear risk into something that can be utilized and integrated more into the way we make various business and financial decisions. So really looking forward to all of your feedback and comments and input and taking this concept forward.
Any additional remarks from the other authors?
Well, maybe following up on Shyam's word, we really, I mentioned collective learning before, and this really is a case for collective learning. And all your ideas or of inspiration, please share them with us. And your organization doesn't have to have an unpronounceable abbreviation, as you maybe suggest by all these organizations sitting here. But I welcome all kind of responses on this. So please do. Please become active.
Thank you. Anna?
On behalf of EBRD, I just wanted to conclude that this discussion is really relevant for our countries of operation and our clients. So the next step is to think about the challenge of translating the definition of linear risks into how this is understood and tackled by businesses through their business models and their operations. So we look forward to partnering with other organizations, and we certainly look forward to work with clients and companies who are thinking about these issues and are willing to invest time and resources to overcome them.
Thank you. Arnoud?
Well, I think Anna made a very good point in saying that there's also responsibility on the people here on the table from the panel. And I'm also going to launch this topic amongst our assurance and tax community within KPMG. So that also is one of the contributions we would like to add to this debate with our clients over the globe.
Thank you. Okay, well, I would like to round off. Thank you all for participating, for sending in your questions, and for listening to all the interesting thoughts on linear risks that were shared here in the past hour. If you have any questions or remarks, know where to find us through the email address or contact us via the websites of all the authors. And well, hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So.